Good afternoon in New York and North America's East Coast. Good morning in California. Good evening in Europe and Africa. And welcome whatever time of day or night for all of you who are joining from all corners of the world. I'm Yael Danieli, founder and executive director of the International Center for MultiGenerational Legacies of Trauma, ICMGLT for short. Thank you for joining our webinar on personal, tribal, and social efforts in search of justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, LGBTQIA+ people. Today's International Center for Multigenerational Legacies of Trauma webinar is held in recognition of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Persons Day, observed across the United States and Canada on May 5. Our presenters will discuss their differing tribal communities and societies' effort to break the silence about this prevalent, poignant trauma, raise awareness of it, acknowledge all the missing women, children, people, and their families' pain, and call for preventive action. As with our prior webinars on Indigenous peoples' issues, today's webinar would not have happened without the dedicated help of ICMGLT's board member and co-chair of our working group on Indigenous peoples' issues, Dr. Mary Fabry, and our Canadian board member, Andre Laperriere. Your moderator, I am a clinical psychologist, traumatologist, victimologist, and psychohistorian. In the beginning 70s, I co-founded in New York the Group Project for Holocaust Survivors and Their Children, and since then have devoted much of my career to studying, treating, writing about, and preventing lifelong and multi-generational impact of massive trauma, as well to ensuring victims' rights, to the rights of future generations, and to reparative justice. As a psychohistorian, I conceive of history not only as a set of dates and events, but as it is lived and as it shapes our identities and guides our choices in lives today. Our first speaker today is Melissa Skeet. Melissa Skeet, aka Skeet Fighter, is a Diné Ultra Trail Skater, survivor, motivational speaker who brings awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous persons. A domestic violence survivor, Melissa regained her strength through roller derby. In 2021, she skated across the Navajo Nation, completing 192 miles to raise awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous people. This year, Melissa will roller skate across the nation to bring awareness to MMIP while promoting health, wellness, and healing. I'm afraid that our second speaker, Melanie Morrison, is not feeling well, so she will not join us today. But we do have our third second now, Yolanda Baidoni. Yolanda is from the Hopi tribes and from the village of Tewa. A nurse, she currently works with the Indian Health Services on the Hopi Reservation. She is the vice chair for the Community Board of Commissions, an advocate for her missing sister, Keisha Kutsawatewa. Yolanda has been on the Survivors Advisory Board for the Arizona State University School of Criminology and Criminology Justice Search for MMIP survivors. Last but not least is Catherine Vanner. Dr. Vanner is a settler Canadian living with her partner and 3 children on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. She is an assistant professor of educational foundations at the University of Windsor, where she uses qualitative and participatory research methods to study the relationship between gender, education, and violence. We have an hour and a half for the webinar. Each of our panelists will speak for between 10 to 15 minutes now that we have one less. Following an interchange among us, I will open the floor to questions or brief comments from the virtual audience. We will then conclude with last words. Please use the chat function and we will do our best to respond to as many as we can. And of course, feel free to direct your question to a particular panelist or to the full panel. I now have the pleasure to offer the screen to Melissa. Melissa, dear, the screen is yours.
Yeah. Thank you. Good morning to those who are in the morning session, or I guess morning zone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me just go ahead and do that.
Take your time. We have more time than we anticipated. Wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So let's see, I'm just going to go ahead. It's kind of not giving me some options here right now. It's kind of, oh, there we go. Okay. So this is my story that I'd like to tell you all. I am Diné, which means Navajo. It means the people. And I grew up in the Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona, so northern Arizona, and I'm currently in Washington State. So I've worked in victim assistance for about 14 years, soon to be, I think, honestly. I don't really keep track. I had someone ask me this question of how long I've been doing this, and I'm like, I don't know. So I finally counted. It's like 14-ish, years and some change. I've worked in community-based nonprofit victim assistance agencies and then system-based victim assistance agencies. So it's kind of been it's been a learning curve for me, working in victim assistance. And for those who aren't familiar with victim assistance, it's working with victims of crime across the United States. And I've worked in different territories and different jurisdictions, had to work with different types of individuals and different tribes, and worked with FBI, BIA, different agencies from across the nation. So thank you. You're going to hear that a lot from me today, saying thank you to you all in Navajo. But my journey is a lot different than most. And my journey is my roller skates have a story to tell. And I'm not only just a roller skater. My journey, my story kind of started off when I was a young child. And it seems like I'm a very, very happy and excited child here, but there was a lot of pain behind these little eyes. And I grew up in a family of domestic violence, and that was all I really knew growing up. And I've always wondered why I had nightmares, why I had, certain, like why I was a bully. I admit this, and I tell this to different audiences as a speaker, is I talk about how I was a bully as a child. And I always wondered why my mom always kept me in different sports and different um, group organizations for like children. And I think it was just because she wanted to distract me from what was really going on. So my father, both my mom and my dad are Diné, as in Navajo, and my mom is from Arizona. My father's from New Mexico. So growing up, I definitely felt as if I was, living just again the normal life. And within our family, we always had to keep this quiet, and I never understood why. And there's the process too of normalizing it. And if we talked about it, my mom, I remember she'd be like, "Shh, don't say anything, don't tell anybody." I always remember hearing my parents too saying like, just forget it, move on. Tomorrow's just going to be a new day. It's fine. It's fine. But really what was happening was a lot more than that. And there was anxiety, increased fear. I always had nightmares, and I will never forget them till this day. I remember getting up screaming in the middle of the night, and my mom would freak out and would actually grab me and carry me over to the living room and she would turn on the TV and just, shush me. Shh. And I didn't realize at this time too, was I was going through depression, bullying, and it it was hard to understand this as a child because no one was able to guide me through it. And my grades were declining throughout all of, elementary school. And I had to be put into different programs to help me out with reading or writing. Overall, I just sucked at math, still to this day. So I can push math aside. I had depression, I had anxiety. As 30 something year old right now, I have ADHD. So a lot of these, types of mental health, I feel, has kind of stemmed from a child growing up in this. And as I got older, I started to drink pretty heavily during the time that I was in college. And to be honest, I don't want to just point out all of the negatives growing up into a family of violence. I always wondered why my mom stuck me into different programs and sports, as I mentioned, and working out and school activities. These things are what helped me I guess overall, just be a part of a team to distract me. And it just, you wonder why you start to, you grow up into this. And I didn't understand until I got older that my parents were a part of something very, very dark. And they were thrown into this. And this is the boarding schools. And I know in Canada, they call them residential schools. Mm-hmm. So there is a huge, huge move going on right now. And it's talking about the children that were found in Kamloops, Canada, at the residential schools there. And in the US, I remember actually hearing my mom telling me these stories. She had a hard time trying to tell me fully everything, but she would tell me snippets of what happened in boarding school. And I can tell there was always that pain inside. And at one point in time, my mom also one day told me what happened to my father in boarding schools. And I will not share it because it's very, very, it's very abusive. And this kind of just stuck with my entire family, and that my parents aren't the only ones that had gone through this. They, as well as my family members of my aunts, my uncles, my great aunts, my great uncles, my grandparents, my grandfather, all of them are survivors. And the boarding schools is, it was a way to take away who we are and who we were. And it was a way to, what they say was, kill the Indian, save the man. And that was the famous words that were used, was to try and assimilate the Indigenous youth into leaving who they were, which was an Indigenous individual, their culture, their background, their language, everything, and then move them in and transition into a white person, colonization. And this is something my parents had to go through. And they had to learn the English language. Their first language was not English. It was actually Navajo, Diné. And in these boarding schools, there was a lot of darkness from abuse, sexual abuse. Many of them were killed. And that's what they found in the Kamloops, Canada, at the residential schools, was a lot of burial sites of children. And a lot of those children were never returned to their families. So this is one thing that I also had to grow up with. And I actually was told as a young child that I could not speak my language, and I was told to speak English. So I don't know my full native tongue. Yeah, I'm still learning it. And I do know my clans, but I'm still learning how to say it in Navajo. And this stems to generational trauma. This is something that is passed on. The violence of what my family had gone through is just passed down. And the violence of domestic abuse is what I'm used to. And growing up, I ended up getting involved into, actually involved with an abusive person. Now, this photo is me at 29 years old. And this is the day that I almost lost my life. And this photo, actually, I was a victim advocate. I was a very new victim advocate. Actually, I had been in it for about 2 years, and I worked my butt off to be an official victim advocate. And this was for a community-based nonprofit organization. Mm-hmm. So this day, April 14, 2017, the abuser that I was with at this time attempted to take my life through strangulation. So he put his knee on my neck and attempted to take my life by suffocating me. So this was something that really, really stuck with me will stick with me, because at times I'm still surviving from it. And I never thought during this time that I would be going through something like this, or that I would ever go through what my parents went through. But I had examined my entire life of all of the relationships that I have been through or had gone through, and a lot of them had mirrored off my parents' own relationship. And from abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, everything. So within this case of the strangulation, they closed it. And the detective said it's a he said, she said. And because during this time that I was trying to defend myself from this 6'1", very masculine individual, that this other person had scratches from me trying to defend myself, that he said I would have been arrested too if they, basically, during this time, I did not call the police, because I knew I was going to be arrested, because I knew how these cases went. So he said, basically, you know what, you would have been arrested. So it's a good thing you didn't call right away. But I did later. I reported it a couple days later. I was terrified to do this. And this is what a lot of survivors, and I hear a lot of survivors of domestic violence, have gone through. And it's hard to hear that. It's hard to hear victims say, I don't want to report it because I know I'm going to be arrested, because I know if the abuser has any sort of scratch on their face, they will be arrested. So it didn't stop there. The abuse did not stop. What happened afterwards was I lost family. I lost friends. I went through a very, very dark place, through depression. I had PTSD, so I had nightmares. I will never forget every single nightmare that I had. And that was always having the fear that the abuser was going to dart through my door again, because he would always knock down my bedroom door and just start yelling at me. And I was re-victimized by my employer. And this employer was a victim assistance community-based agency. And I later lost my job. So the healing part of this is what was really important to, and what I love to talk about. So during this time, I was actually in roller derby. And I remember going to roller derby practice and feeling as if I just was ready to give up and not wanting to go to practice because I was just so exhausted from being depressed, from being in that dark space and trying to get out and actually move my body back to its normal state. So roller derby and the roller derby dynamics or family dynamics is what saved me. These individuals in the roller derby family they were huge supporters of mine, kept me going, kept uplifting me, and empowered me to regain that strength back that the abuser took from me. So I started getting also into therapy, did EMDR, that's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a really, really great method to use for any survivors. And they actually use it for military vets, and a lot of special agents and law enforcement officers that I know also are in EMDR. Drawing boundaries. I drew my boundaries with certain family members who said it was my fault for what happened, who I've also had other family members tell me, you need to go back to him. That's your man. That's who you need to be with. So I'm not going to continuously hear that. So I wanted to move forward knowing that I was going to be healthy, knowing that my mental state was most important. So I did. I continued my career in victim assistance, kept going at it, and didn't stop there. I actually almost completely retired at it at a young age within victim assistance, because I had a feeling that every single victim assistance agency was going to be like the last one where they re-victimized me. I created a mission to bring awareness to MMIP, and I wanted to promote health, wellness, and healing through roller skating, because I love roller skating. I trail skated, and I loved being out in the outdoors with wildlife and trees, what Mother Earth and Mother Nature bring, and the Creator. I loved it. And it just turned into a big passion. And then I'd like to introduce my fiance, and he actually is a part of my team of what I do with my skating mission. And the 192-mile skate that we did back in 2021, he was the main reason why I kept going at it. I actually wanted to give up, and I didn't want to do it. I kept wanting to, say, no, I don't think it's possible. This is not going to happen. And he was the one who was like, no, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. So we ended up on the Navajo Times. This was one of my favorite photos because I was cramping and dying in this photo, but he was looking at me. He's like, you got this. I'm like, oh. So this is my fiance. This is what it looks like now. And still till this day, I'm like, this is actually what a healthy relationship looks like. So, and this is my roller derby family. Love these ladies still to this day. We still keep in contact. Should I say ladies and gents, and beautiful individuals who I still talk to till this day. And this is my husky Mika. I've had her since she was a puppy. And now, as a 10-year-old, 10-and-a-half-year-old sassy, sasshole husky. And she actually went through every single abuse with me, actually. So she actually was, I hate to say it, she was physically abused by the abuser as well. But she's got a great dad now. Trail skating. So ultra trail skating. This is me on an actual road in the middle of nowhere in Montana, roller skating and just loving. I actually was yelling and screaming at this point saying, oh my gosh, I love this life. So this is what we're doing this year. And what I do is I bring awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous persons. I bring education as well with it. And the reason why I'm doing this is I want to make sure that I come forward of, be that person who's not going to sit back and just let this happen continuously. I want to be that person who's going to say, okay, well, I'm going to put on my skates. I'm going to put a red handprint on my face because that is a very, very powerful symbol. And I'm going to be that warrior to go out and bring awareness to something that needs to be talked about, because we are still going through a systemic genocide. Our women, children, men, elders, LGBTQ and Two-Spirit are still, their voices are not being heard and their families are not being heard. So I'm going to be that person to get out there and skate and say, and people are going to come to me and ask me, why are you're a crazy person, you're roller skating where, in the middle of nowhere, and why are you doing this? And it's that why that I'm going to tell them, here's why. So this is what I do, and I have actually partnered with a nonprofit organization called Okomi Forensics from Montana, and they are an amazing nonprofit, and they actually work closely with mostly with the forensic side of the investigations, because I feel like the forensics portion of the investigation is overlooked, and there's some sketchy things that happen within the investigations during this time. So it's a young woman, Indigenous woman, who leads this program, and part of the proceeds from the Great Skate Tour for this year that I will be doing is going to go to Okomi Forensics. We are taking donations to also help my fiance and I, because it's just going to be my fiance, myself, and my two fluffy dogs, Mal and Mute and my husky, doing this trip. And we'll be going from Washington State starting July 16th and going for 2 to 3 months straight of roller skating across the nation until we get to DC to bring awareness to MMIP. So feel free to scan the QR code, which takes you to my link tree and all the information. Feel free to email me with questions. I do now have a YouTube finally, because that's where we're going to document everything of all of the struggles and everything, and telling stories and other survivors and victim stories of, you know, what they've gone through. So yeah, thank you so much for letting me tell you my story, and I look forward to hearing from many of you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And this will be on our website, of course. We are recording the webinar, so you can find it there in case you were too late right this minute. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for teaching us that resilience is not about not getting help. It is about getting help when you acknowledge that you need it and using it to grow. And despite all kinds of obstacles, including the justice system, we will probably speak more about that, about the case of MMIP too. And thank you for growing enough to understand with compassion what your parents went through, and put it in a historical context, a multi-generational context. Those of you who want to learn a lot more about the residential school system, we have several webinars already on our website. Also on August 8th, we will have two of the most important Indigenous researchers in this field, a Canadian and a United States, both Indigenous, and speaking for international Indigenous, the World Day of Indigenous People, about the multi-generational effects of the residential schools indeed. So it belongs to a whole lot of what we have been looking at. Thank you so much, dear, and thank you for your spirit. And for this smile. It's like, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
And Yolanda, the floor is now yours, please. You have to unmute.
I'm muted. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Yolanda Bidoni. I am Hopi, Navajo, and Tewa. I'm a tribal member of the Hopi tribe. So my journey with the MMIP and how I became an advocate was of my sister, Keisha Kutswaitiwa. She is really my first cousin, as you would call her. My mom and her mom are sisters, but she was more like a daughter to me. I have a daughter the same age as her. So she spent a lot of time at my home, hanging out with my daughter. They acted like sisters, but really was my daughter's aunt. Keisha came from also a struggling family. She was the second youngest of 8 children that my aunt had. Her father passed when she was very young, I believe like three years old, and growing up without that father figure, and her mom, struggling, and also her mother again went to boarding school, and I'm pretty sure her mom, had some, struggles in that, and then trying to raise her children and having that struggle trying to raise 8 children. So with that and growing up and having Keisha at my home with my daughter, she went through a lot of things throughout her high school years, just a lot of depression, sadness, and I'm talking with her, and having my daughter there kind of just, uplifted her, and just being away from her home and being with, support. So as they grew into adulthood, she fell in love and had started her family. She was very anti, drug, alcohol. She didn't want that around her family, her children. She's got 3 daughters, 3 beautiful daughters. And she was a powwow mother. Her and her significant other, they weren't married, but we're together. I believe 15 years, I believe. And they were a powwow family. And they went throughout the powwow circuits into Canada, into, the United States. And she was a great mother. She, wanted the best for her children. And I believe it had to do with, what she had grown up with.
Mhm.
She was very talented, very loving. We always had family events in our family. And she was our coordinator for our events, like football or kickball, or, the game. She loved to do that for our family events. And she was always the first one that said, I'm going to do that. But as the years went by, her relationship started to, it wasn't working out. And the depression started to set in, because everything was taken away from her. Her children, just everything that she built with this relationship. We go through, divorces and stuff and separations, but it was kind of hard and very, it wasn't a good situation. And I forgot to add to Keisha's thing, she also graduated in 2017 at the Navajo Technical College with an associate's degree, and she was going for her nursing. She never used it. She wanted to have family. Her girls were young. She just wanted to just be there for them and have a family. But when that happened to her, the depression set in. She went spiraling down. She came to us. My husband tried, speaking with her. It just took a toll on her. It just took her to where she started to associate herself with people that we would never have seen her with. We would try to talk with her because we started seeing that, but she would always tell, I'm okay, they're my friends. And but we knew those weren't the right kind of friends. So she ended up with that depression, went deeper, and ended up getting into drugs, thinking that that was gonna, solve her depression, and not wanting to think about what she was going through. And as the years went on, this went on for 2 years, a couple years. And we got to where, we weren't hearing from her for a couple weeks, or a month or so, and she'd pop up, and we're okay, she's there. So on March 26th was the day that of 2022 is when she went missing. So our family did not know about this until 2 weeks after that date, because we did not know, her doing the, not showing up, it was just, we didn't know. One day she would, one day we'd see her, until we found a message. We have a family group Facebook page that just lets us all know how everybody's doing, events. And we had someone notify us and say, hey, have you heard from Keisha? So it kind of stirred up, that on our family page. And we said, did you see that? Did you see it? And so I initiated the contact, and I had asked, what are you saying? Why are you telling us that this, And she said, well, I'm Keisha's friend, and we usually have contact with each other every day, and she is not answering my messages. So I said, okay, well, let me see, so our family started, hey, have you heard from her? Have you seen her? So we started all working together. Then we got a call. We got a call from Keisha's boyfriend at the time, and we did not know she had a boyfriend. And he's the one who told us what had happened that night, because he said he's wanting to let our family know what had happened. So that's when we started to, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know, this never happened in our family. We didn't know the process. So we went to our tribe, Hopi Police Department, to let them know and report her as missing. And this is where our journey began, of jurisdictions and the complications of where she went missing. So she went missing on the borderline of the Hopi tribal land and the Navajo land. We're in between a little island surrounded by the Navajo Nation, the Hopi tribe is. And she happened to be on that border, just right over the Hopi borderline at this home. So when we went to try to report her, the Hopi Police Department had said, well, it's on Navajo jurisdiction. You need to go to the Navajo Police Department, the local there. And she disappeared from Tisto, Arizona, the little border town there. So we went to Delcom Police Department to report. And they said, well, she's Hopi. You need to go to Hopi. And we were pushed back and forth. And we finally went to our Hopi Police Department and said, look, we need to report her missing. We went there like he told us, but they're sending us back here. Somebody needs to take this report. So they ended up taking our report, the Hopi Police Department. But then we thought, okay, what's next? What else do we do? We have limited resources here on our Hopi tribal land. We don't have anything to make awareness to our communities, in case this happens. And it does happen here on Hopi. And why I do this is because I want to make awareness here on our Hopi land. I want to have our tribal councils realize that this is happening. I find that I found out as I had this journey, my family and I are advocates now for the missing and murdered. I've been around telling Keisha's story about her missing. And I'm not sure how much I can say about her case because it's now an FBI case, but I feel that this needs to be heard. Her story needs to be heard on what had happened. Is that this home that she was at must have had a party, I'm going to say. And with that party, there were shots that were reported early hours of that 26th of March. And in that, out of that report, there not only is Keisha missing, there's 2 other males that are missing as well, who were shot and killed at the scene. They took Keisha, she was alive, and they forced her to load those bodies up and take them. And they took her. We have not heard from Keisha since then. I don't know, my hopes that, that she was taken when she was alive, that, they have her, and she's alive. But, rumors in the small communities talk is that they unalived them all and threw them in a well. And Navajo land is far and wide. Our family has done searches, have had fundraisers to get out there and search miles of land. And it's been 2 years that we've been doing this. And I know with that party, there is someone out there, there are people who know what happened, but nobody wants to say. So with that, we're fighting for justice. It brought 3 families together to help find our loved one. We didn't know these other families, but it brought us together, and all 3 of our families are looking and searching for them. And in that small community, they stood behind us because of threats that they encounter. They're afraid. I think this is a dangerous job, going out there to look. But we want to find our loved ones. We want to find them because they didn't deserve this. And that's what we have out there is judgment against, our stigmatizations of what lives they took. And it wasn't because of, this is what she was wild and crazy. It was because she was in depression. And I don't want that to be, labeled on her and people to judge her because of what road she took. So with that, our family has gone social media. We've created a GoFundMe. We've created Finding Keisha is what we call it on our Facebook and social media. We have been advocates out there. I've been to conferences to learn more. I've been telling her story because Keisha is silent out there, and she's got 3 daughters waiting for their mom. And so our family has been on this journey and advocating for not only for Keisha, but for others as well. So with that, I'm also working again for more resources for our Hopi tribe. Our law enforcement needs, more, I believe, more training, more resources. Our council needs to hear what's going on with their community people. And that's my goal, is to make awareness here on Hopi. We do have a lot that are missing that I don't hear their stories, but I want to be able to take those families' stories as well and tell their side as well here. If they can't do it, then I'll do it for them, because I feel like this was my calling. That's what I believe. It's unfortunate how our family is going through right now. But this is her story. And we're working very hard. And right now we're working on, now that winter has have gone and summer's coming, we are now getting fundraising to work on to do our next searches till winter comes again. So I've been out there doing what I feel I need to do. So that's what I have on my sister, Keisha, and I'm so happy to have been on here to tell my story for her. Esqueli. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda. for the honor of giving a home to your sister, to Keisha's, to finding Keisha's, and to your story. And I want to add a note here, draw from what you said, that the tendency to blame the victim, right? The stigma is on the
Yes.
victim. And
Yes.
the shame is the victim shame rather than perpetrator shame. And
Right.
the difficulty for even finding where to find justice.
Right.
It's like a case, it belongs to the other and the other. And so which makes it more and more frustrating, of course.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's underscore that. So you're not just calling for finding Keisha, you're calling for reforming the system in such a way that they would be of help. And that,
Yes.
because the same as with Melissa, the police didn't believe her. It was his word or her word. It's
Yes.
there's a lot of fighting to do, and I'm glad we are enlarging our fighting capabilities with you. So thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Catherine, please. We're very happy to have you.
I want to thank first Melissa and Yolande for their courage in sharing their personal stories in such beautiful ways. And to Yolanda, just to say my heart is just going out to you and your family as you search for Keisha.
Thank you.
I'm going to try to now shift to sharing a little bit of some of my research that focuses on education specifically, but I think more broadly speaks to the question of what are the role of settlers in responding to this crisis. So I'm gonna share my screen because I have some slides. So this is the result of a research project that I did in a beautiful team. So this team was a intergenerational team of Indigenous and non-Indigenous women. Myself, I am of British ancestry. I grew up in Kingston, Ontario, on the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat people. But we convened this research project where I am now at the University of Windsor on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy First Nations, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi people. But we did have some more senior scholars, Claudia Mitchell and Angelina Weenie, joining from across the country. And then we had a beautiful team of Megan Logan, Kendall Ryan and Jillian Goyo working with me here at the University of Windsor. And it was really important for us to do this in a team perspective because so much of this, it's just essential to be centering the perspectives of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQI people, even as we are speaking about what can non-Indigenous or settler scholars and educators do to respond to the phenomenon of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQI people. So we've heard a lot about this topic already, but I'll just set the stage a little bit in terms of a Canadian context where we are operating. This research was convened following the national inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQI people, which concluded with a report in 2019, which labeled this a genocide, and just really, really incredibly tragically noted the statistics that Indigenous women and girls in Canada are 16 times more likely to go missing or become murdered than white Canadian women, and 12 times more likely than any other women in Canada. So both globally and nationally recognized as as an epidemic and a genocide. Within the report from the National Inquiry, which I'll say also the National Inquiry was an Indigenous-led process, which resulted, it was funded by the Canadian government, but only after decades of advocacy from Indigenous women, activists and organizations. So it came out with this report in 2019, and it had a series of calls for justice, one of which was directed, or actually two of which, but one of which I'm focusing on here, was directed towards educators. So I'm going to read that call for justice from the report. Says, we call upon all elementary, secondary, and post-secondary institutions and education authorities to educate and provide awareness to the public about missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people, and about the issues and root causes of violence they experience. All curriculum development and programming should be done in partnership with Indigenous people, especially Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people. Such education and awareness must include historical truths about the genocide against Indigenous peoples through state laws, policies, and colonial practices. It should include, but not be limited to, teaching Indigenous history, law, and practice from Indigenous perspectives, and the use of their voices will guide us with children and youth. So their voices will guide us is this student and youth engagement guide that you can see pictured here. It was published, led by Charlene Barehead, and published alongside the National Inquiry. So they really recommend, and throughout all of our results, we speak back to their voices will guide us, so that we're really clear that our recommendations and perspectives align really squarely with the recommendations of the National Inquiry.
Catherine, may I ask you, please, when you have a chance, to put it in the chat, to put the reference in the chat. And the same, I'm sorry, remiss, I was so moved by what the two of you said before that I forgot. Please put everything you want on the chat so everybody has, you know, the capacity of reaching you. Sorry, Catherine, for interrupting. I was too moved to think technically. Go ahead.
No, thank you for that. So I will absolutely do that at the end of the presentation
Yes.
to share both the link to the National Inquiry's report as well as the Student and Youth Engagement Guide. So a few years ago in 2015, we in Canada had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was really about sharing the findings of residential schools, of the magnitude and the devastation of residential schools, which has been alluded to already in this webinar. And the calls for education in the TRC really have had huge impacts across the country, in the sense that now, almost 10 years later, residential schools as a topic is integrated into all formal curricula. You will not find somebody educated through the Canadian school system of the up-and-coming generation who will say they don't know what residential schools are, which is a huge shift from previous generations.
And from the silence described before.
Exactly. But following the National Inquiry, we haven't seen the same shift yet in terms of the incorporation of the subject of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited people into the curricular context in the same way. And I think there's a variety of reasons that happens, but I think one of them is the fact that residential schools, you know, are historical in the sense that even though there are still people, many people alive who experience them, they are not ongoing anymore, as opposed to this ongoing genocide is still happening. And I think that makes it even more raw and challenging to discuss. And obviously the two issues are linked as well, as the previous presenters alluded to. So this research project really led with, okay, well, how can teachers enhance the critical consciousness of Canadian young people about missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2S LGBTQI people? And what does that education look like so that it can guide other educators to be enhancing their own education? So our methodology, we interviewed 8 grade 7 to 12 teachers across the country who were already teaching about this subject in their formal curriculum classrooms. So not an extracurricular or non-formal, but in the provincially approved curriculum. We also did a workshop with 11 members of the Young Indigenous Women's Utopia, which is an incredible Indigenous-led girls organization in Saskatoon, traditional Treaty 6 territory, traditional homeland of the Métis people. And they are all about teaching girls to challenge colonial and gender-based violence through traditional Indigenous knowledge systems. So we had 11 Indigenous girl participants from a variety of different First Nations in the area participate, all of whom had already been engaged in this work against gender-based violence and against colonial violence. And we talked to them in a variety of ways about how have they learned about different forms of gender-based violence. And also the key question for this project was, what do you want your teachers to know when teaching about gender-based violence? So that our results were guided both by the teachers who are already teaching about this issue. Of the 8, 7 were non-Indigenous, were settlers, and only 1 identified as an Indigenous teacher, as Métis. So many of them were speaking from a settler perspective, and then combining that with the Indigenous girls talking about the kind of education that they wanted to see. So I'll kind of touch on all of our different facets and themes of our results, but the first and overarching one was that this is all driven by the desire to make change. But of the kind of different groups, that kind of change and what was driving them looked different from different perspectives. So we had our the settler teachers teaching mostly settler or kind of diverse refugee first generation, second generation immigrant families. So really diverse urban contexts in some cases, but all saying we have to learn about this issue because we want to make change. We want to stop this phenomenon from happening. So you can see that in Heather's quote, when students ask her, how do you do this? Why do you teach about this every day? It's so depressing. And she says, I look at you guys and I know you can change it. You know, and I know you can get out there and you can learn about it now, and it upsets you and you're motivated to do something about it, then you can do it. But for Marie, our only Indigenous participant in the project who taught in mainly Indigenous community and school, she also was seeking to provide change through her education, but with a very different purpose, saying that it's really about the young people that she's trying to reach and having them understand the root causes of the violence that they're seeing and experiencing, and how that's linked to broader colonial structures. So it's not their fault. It's not their family's fault. And then perhaps most poignantly was the change that the Indigenous girls wanted to see in their own lives. They said, we want you to teach about this so that we will get to a point where we will fear no more. We will not be afraid to walk down the street in our neighborhood. We will not be afraid that we will be directly affected. So in speaking with the teachers and the students about what they wanted to see that education look like to create change, first off, our Indigenous girl participants said that they often weren't learning about this subject at all, maybe in their homes, in their families, or in their communities, or in groups like the Young Indigenous Women's Utopia, but not in schools. So one participant said, I never learned about this until grade 8 when my mom and dad told me about it. We don't really learn about anything that happens in Indigenous communities. All we learn about is the history of us. So she's saying we weren't being given the language and the knowledge to understand from a school perspective what is happening in our communities currently. And then switching to a teacher perspective, Sam is saying that even though she wants to be teaching about these issues, she doesn't have the resources provided to her. So unlike other subjects where the textbooks and materials are all really readily available, she has to do so much extra work to find age-appropriate resources about this subject, which is why pointing people to that their voices will guide us, as well as some of the other resources that I can link to in the chat is really valuable. And Their Voices Will Guide Us speaks about the need to engage in critical examination with students about the impact of colonization on Indigenous women and girls, and getting students to engage in kind of critical thinking to be able to draw their own conclusions. An example of an activity that they suggest is looking at kind of comparison of research and family and community initiated search and rescue efforts in the case of various missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, or for example, examining the difference between formal search and rescue efforts depending on whether the woman or girl is Indigenous or non-Indigenous. And by doing that, you get to start to see how some of the colonial impacts that are still happening in how Indigenous girls and women are especially framed as kind of as was mentioned earlier, as almost deserving it, as opposed to non-Indigenous women and girls, which are often framed just exclusively as victims, and how that will shape the entire trajectory of all the resources, all of the efforts that are put into finding them. So that's one example that they recommend for kind of thinking critically about this topic. Our teachers and the guide especially talk about the importance of centering Indigenous identity and lived experience in that process in connecting to communities. And I loved this quote from Marie, the Métis teacher participant, who talked about that it's overwhelming. As a settler, a scholar, she recognized that, or settler educator and teacher, that there's a lot of fear about kind of doing it wrong, but that by working in partnership with Indigenous communities, by using Indigenous created resources, that teachers could move forwards in a way that they felt confident that they were centering the appropriate voices and perspectives. So she says, somebody who's engaging in this process and doing things in a proper way, having the courage to ask those kind of hard questions, that's what's needed. It doesn't mean you become an expert or all-knowing, or that you're not going to keep engaging with Indigenous women or elders or people who have these stories, but you have to hear that with humility, and then you make possible indigenization, so that there is a path for settler teachers to engage in this work, even if it feels daunting to be interacting with stories that are so traumatic, even if there's a fear of doing it wrong, that ultimately providing a path and awareness about these subjects is more important, and that they have to kind of overcome those obstacles to center the voices of people who can authentically speak about this. We also talked about creating a safe space for all voices. And one of my teacher participants, a settler teacher, Lee, who was really reflexive on her own process, she describes how at the end of one gender studies course in which she talked about this subject, one girl who was Indigenous shared with me how difficult it was to learn that people like her had been so victimized and continue to be victimized. She says, I think a challenge as a teacher is you have to talk about the victimization of women and girls, but also to find stories of empowerment. So she now really works to have an intersectional course, so that no matter what topic she's teaching about, students who identify in the class with that group will see stories of people who look like them, who are engaging in activism, in change for their communities, to stand up for their communities. So you don't only see a picture of victimization, but also one of resilience and of empowerment. And that aligns very much with the recommendations from the Their Voices Will Guide Us guide, which talks about exploring concepts of resistance, resilience, and resurgence of cultural roles, values, teachings, practices, including Indigenous laws, governance, and practices. But they also in the guide recommend that centering the voices of students so that students are kind of able to talk about and to reflect upon the opportunities that are prevented by their own voice and their own agency, and how they can lift their voices in a way that can raise more awareness in their communities, regardless of their identity. But another thing that came out of the workshop with the Young Indigenous Women's Utopia is that girls are still experiencing discrimination in a school setting based on their gender and racial identity. So in this video, the girls who created this we call them cell films. This video shared that a lot of non-Indigenous teachers in Canada have stereotypes on Indigenous students, high schools and elementary schools, and teachers should not expect us to fail. They should have higher expectations on us students. So it suggests that all of these recommendations about expanding the curriculum, about centering Indigenous voices, if Indigenous students ultimately feel that they're being discriminated against or that they're not being believed in by their teachers, that nothing else is going to really make a difference. That they have to start with examining their own bias and their own connection to the students in their class who are in front of them. So I want to close with these two quotes, which I think really center and drive home the question of just what are we doing here? And I love this quote from Wallace Casey, who says, "What might it mean to live our lives as if the lives of others truly mattered?" And I think when we bring that to education, saying what are we teaching about in terms of centering the importance of the tragedies that are happening in our country, that we have the potential to affect change if we really attend and think about what does it mean to act as if the lives of others truly mattered. And then I think that has to accompany this quote from Sandy Grande, who talks about acting as agents of transgression, posing critical questions and engaging in dangerous discourse. And I think as settler teachers and educators and people in general, we have the privilege of choice about whether or not we are going to engage and talk about things that are affecting the lives of others. And Sandy Grande calls upon us to do that, to act as agents of transgression and to refuse to accept the status quo, but to lift our voices and use our opportunities that we have in our classrooms and our lives to say this is not acceptable. And we have to think about rethinking our systems that have enabled this to happen and think about how we can do it differently. Thank you very much. I'll end there.
Thank you, Catherine. Really invaluable. Thank you very much. And immediately invaluable in the sense that we've met before you presented two Indigenous women who take it upon themselves to do all the work. And you're also saying you're not alone. We are also thinking about this, and we are joining you in this struggle, which touches me very, very deeply. So I just had a fleeting thought that for next year on MMIP Day, MMIW Day, we should have police from all of the police. And now we had teachers. Next year we should have police and maybe law, not just law enforcement, but law determiner, both Indigenous and others, to speak about their point of view and their challenges and how they can be of help. And what I really like about your I like the honesty in the presentation. It's very it's empowering. I wonder if you can now unmute yourselves, all of you, and I wonder if you have any comment or question to each other, and then we can go to the audience. Anyone we'll go back to Melissa. Anything came up for you in the presentation after yours?
It was very good information. I appreciate that so much, Catherine, especially knowing, I feel like there's parallels with Canada and the US, and there's also parallels with other countries that I know that we're finding out about our history. And it's amazing to see not just Indigenous people trying to tell the story or history of what's going on, but they're individuals like yourselves who are willing to listen and to actually teach on it as well. And it's been so hard to have a lot of teachers within the school districts across the nation to talk about our history, because there's always those individuals who, the staff for the schools to say, no, we don't want our children, non-Native children, to feel bad about the history of what their ancestors did to the Indigenous people, so we're not going to share it. So that's just another BS way to say we're not going to talk about what really happened and the truth. So thank you for sharing this information and talking about it, and to do these different studies and work with these students and to teach them young. So thank you.
Yolanda, anything came up for you listening to?
I really like Catherine's presentation. It is true, and I'm only talking here for Hopi, is that as I was going on this journey of trying to make awareness to this, one of them was, our youth, and our elderly, because at one time when I did attend a summit here on Hopi, we had some elderly that were just unaware that this was happening, that this was going on. And it was just surprising to me that, I was hearing this. And also going back to our youth, that, how can our school system, make awareness? And it's just it's like that. They don't want to talk about certain things, or it gets shut off. Because I don't know if they want to know that it's not something to talk about, or it's a hush hush thing. We shouldn't talk about things like that. But those kind of things need to be made aware, because of these things that are happening now on our reservations, and it goes back to our laws and our where we have Creepy Joe that came in from a non-native land, they're non-native, and they come on reservations, and we have that going on now, because, and I don't know if it's because they know that, oh, hey, let's go on to a reservation, because if we commit something here, a crime, we won't get caught for it. These are the laws that need to be changed. And it just goes so deep that I just want to make change everywhere. I especially want to start at Hopi. So with that presentation, Catherine, I agree, what our youth, our elderly need to make aware that this is happening here.
So you're saying that teaching needs to be done in school, but also outside of schools. So we should also ask,
yes.
What about the media?
As well as the media. You know, social media, you know, like there's where some, okay, so I want to go on social media. I want to say what I feel I want to say, but then I get told, you know, don't say that, or, you know, it's very dangerous. What if this happens and you're putting your family in? So then there I am, you know, kind of with a hand over my mouth, because this stuff needs to be addressed, but they're saying, no, don't say that, or no, don't do that. So I'm kind of just, you know, frustrated at the situation, but then there's me. I'm gonna do it because it needs to be done. No matter how, you know, what Catherine said, you know, no matter how hurtful it is to hear, how, you know, it, some people just don't want to hear it. They want their ears closed. They want, you know, it's like, no, 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 I don't want to hear it. But we have to make changes.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Yolanda. That's one thing I did. I get I get told so many times of, you know, you need security when you're actually doing these kind of skates. I'm like, okay. You know, people tell me you're crazy for what you're doing, roller skating across the nation. What? You know, you're gonna get hurt, you're gonna get attacked by someone. And like, you know, here's the thing is that's the type of motive that we've been hearing for so many years. And we as women and survivors are warriors, and we're going to keep on doing this and bringing the awareness out there and the education, because that's another, I feel, tactic to be silent about it is just keep it quiet. Don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And, you know, for your safety, just keep it quiet. And here we are, just resilient women, Indigenous women are going to just say, you know, whatever, we're going to do it despite what you say.
Right.
But yeah, thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we can maybe we can, Catherine, is there anything you would like to say before I go to the audience?
Just that it's an honor to have spoken after Melissa and Yolanda, and you know, I'm just humbled by your stories. I guess my only question for both of you is, do you have any glimmers of hope in the work that you're doing, in the roller skating, in identifying as feeling that this is your calling, in light of so much hardship? Do you see progress, momentum?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I know there's hope for it. I know when I did the first 192-mile skate across the Navajo Nation, it opened up a lot of eyes. And I even do this, I compete in races, roller skating, or should I say they're inline skates, but inline skating races, but I just put on my roller skates and I go out and race with a red handprint on my face. And there's always a negative feedback from people, but that's just because they don't know what that means until they come to me and say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean what I said, but I want to know what that means. And that's when a conversation starts. And that's when every single one of them leaves that conversation saying, thank you, I didn't know that. And now I know how to address it the next time. And I will be competing again in the same races this year, and along with roller skating the across the nation. So it starts with a person seeing the red handprint on any of our face, you know, the Indigenous women's faces or individuals' faces or activists' faces, and just going to their phone and Googling, what does the red handprint on the face mean? And then there's a lot of articles and resources for them to just gather and review. And it starts with that. And the thing is, I can't force someone to learn something, but their curiosity will definitely allow them to just Google something online. And then that's when the education starts. And I want to continue to keep doing this in roller skating. And the reason why I do it through roller skating too is because I want to be able to empower others, to let them know that this is how my healing journey started. And I want to allow you to know, like, what is your healing journey? If it's not roller skating or skateboarding or biking, running, what do you like to do? So talking to Indigenous youth as well has been one of my most favorite things to do, and allowing them to know this is where I'm at. You know, yes, I was in that dark place before, but you know, now I'm here. And I have hope for the future that the education and awareness is going to be bigger than where it is right now. And it's going to take people like myself and Yolanda and other Indigenous activists or advocates to go out there and say, I'm not afraid to talk about this. Let's keep on doing it. Let's keep on doing it.
Mhm. And get the leadership of the tribe to support you too. That is extremely important. And maybe discuss openly the issues that you talked about before. How come the shame goes on the victims? How come the stigma goes on the victim? Why keep silent about things that are wrong when you want to right them? So so from the chat, Mary Shabri is thanking you for all your honest and thoughtful presentations. Rania is thanking you for informative webinar. She believes that all educational institutions are called to highlight the International Day of the Disappeared Schools, universities, and this also might be a call to insert such subject in their curricula. Absolutely. Thank you, Rania. That's a great idea. And you can send them to our website to watch this webinar and learn, indeed. And Catherine, thank you for putting in the chat the references to the National Inquiry, the Canada National Inquiry Report, and the Voices Guide Us. Jill Hoffman wants to ask a question. I have my hand raised. I don't see that, but here it is. Now I see that. Robbie, can you give Jill the floor?
Hi, I think I'm unmuted. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, good. I just want to thank you for this talk and tell you that I was one of those ignorant people that didn't know the massiveness of what was happening to the Indigenous culture until I saw on the media a silly series called Alaska Daily. It wasn't such a silly series after I started watching it, because it talked about the invisibility of the Indigenous women who have been massacred and murdered and disappearing and nobody doing anything about it. And it just moved me so much to be aware and start educating people. And I think media is one way that can be shared. And I know a lot of people are scared, but I think it takes people not only within the Indigenous culture, but others that aren't from Indigenous roots to start talking about it and dialoguing about it within their own groups. Because I think it's enough to educate within your culture, but I also think it's really important for other people to know, because they have no clue. And I'm very upset. I would say get a group of women that are within a school if they aren't teaching the proper information. And I know how difficult that is. It's an uphill road with the PTA and such, and say, hey, we need more about what's really happening in this world, because it's invisible. I mean, I know there were marches. I love your idea of skating. You know, I know that one of my friends was a videographer who did the drive across the country because the Indigenous lands were being taken away. And so he drove and did a videography film about the Indians who were caravanning across the United States probably 10 or 15 years ago. And I think it's so important to presented in the media, even 4-minute videos. High schoolers could do that and create a 4-minute video on what's happening. Anyway, I'm going to shut up. I'm talking too much, but I just was very moved by what you said.
Thank you, Jill.
All of you. Thank you.
For your passion. Thank you
you,
for
Jill.
your support and passion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And,
Yeah.
thank you so much. We are waiting for each one of your last word, but of course you'll remain part of the conversation. So, Melissa, thank you for putting up thank you for putting it up in the chat. And Yolanda, if you want to put the Facebook connection to Finding Keisha, you can put that in the chat as well.
Okay.
And I wonder if you have last words. Let's go in the same order. No, maybe the opposite order. Catherine, your last words.
Just to thank both the organizers of this webinar, as well as all the participants, and Yolanda and Melissa for gathering to take time to talk about this and to share our ideas for how to continue to raise awareness. It's a great opportunity to remind ourselves that there's a community of people who care, and that we are there to support each other and keep moving forward.
And thank you. And Yolanda?
Yeah, I want to thank, for this opportunity to be on this webinar, to be able to spread Keisha's story from, France. Is that where I guess I'm the overseas, I was very humbled and shocked, wow, I'm on the webinar across the world.
Yeah.
But, with the job with the awareness that I'm doing is a passion and part of my healing journey. When I first started this, I couldn't get a word out. I couldn't, I cry.
Yeah.
But as I went on, this has empowered me more. Every day that I go out, and each time I get more empowered to tell her story.
Mm-hmm.
And, it takes someone who's willing to be able to step forward and to bring that message of truth and urgency in this awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that, I can do this. And I can make that awareness here, especially my goal is to make that awareness here on our Hopi reservation and our Hopi tribe, because it's well needed.
And you have
So, thank you.
You have our
Esquali.
total. I said you have our total
So,
support.
Esquali, thank you. Thank you.
And Melissa, your last words?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you everybody for ICMGLT and the team here who had allowed us to tell our stories and to talk further about this important issue. And it's been something that we've been screaming, I feel, the Indigenous people since the first MMIW case, which was Matawaka, what people see as the Disney character Pocahontas. So there's a real actual case on that. So as we further talk about it, bring awareness, and are on the front lines, bringing this information out there, I'm glad that there are individuals like yourselves and people who are registered on this webinar to hear us and to talk about it. And so you all can take this information out there and to spread it. And we really appreciate it, especially if this is global information. And if this is new and if there's people here that are new to this, thank you for being here and actually allowing us to provide education and information. And we're always here to answer questions too. So please take my information and use it, please. I love when I hear from different individuals to tell me their stories as well. So and please keep in touch, as the Great Skate Tour is what I call it. I'll be roller skating across the nation from Washington State to Washington, D.C. starting this July 16th. So I usually post a lot of it on my Instagram that we'll be documenting on YouTube as well. So thank you all so much for allowing me to be here.
We look forward to being informed and including it in our daily news of the project. So make sure, of the center, so make sure to feed it to us.
Yes.
Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your resilience and determination, and it's for becoming a part of us, and we as part of you, and we will continue together. And immediately after the conclusion of the webinar, indeed, you'll receive the flyer for our June 5th World Environment Day webinar on generations of environmental stewards claim protections of their indigenous sacred lands. So we are continuing to enlarge the knowledge. So please join us then. Please register and disseminate it as widely as possible, as you've done with this one. And you have a big hug, all of you. And thank you, Catherine, for actually seriously studying it. Thank you. And thank you for the audience, please. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Escali.